The war was finally over. The Treaty of Varkas had been signed, and the galaxy could finally breathe. The HFY Dominion, once humanity's greatest enemy, had claimed victory. Their warships patrolled the borders, their leaders celebrated, and their people rejoiced in what they believed was the end of humanity's resistance. The humans, after years of brutal fighting, had retreated, their fleets shattered, their colonies abandoned. The galaxy moved on, convinced that humanity was no longer a threat. But then, something changed. Without warning, sensors picked up an unknown object emerging from deep space. A massive warship, ancient yet untouched by time, moved toward the outer rim of Selvok-controlled territory. Its hull was dark, reinforced with metals that scanners could not identify, and its weapons were unlike anything seen before. It bore no known markings, no identification, no signal of peace. It simply moved forward, silent and unstoppable. The Dominion's command center received an incoming transmission, but it was not a request for communication. It was a single message, played in a cold, emotionless voice. "Do we have unfinished business?" Then, the warship went silent. No further transmissions, no response to hails. Just the quiet, steady advance of a vessel that should not exist. The HFY were confused at first. They had destroyed humanity's fleets. They had crushed their resistance. Where had this warship come from? Some believed it was an old relic, a lost piece of human technology wandering aimlessly through space. Others feared it was a trap, a desperate attempt at retaliation. But as the warship continued its advance, something became terrifyingly clear. This was no accident. It was heading straight for the Dominion's core systems, and it was not slowing down. The Dominion's High Council immediately called for action. A fleet of warships was dispatched to intercept the intruder. They moved swiftly, surrounding the unknown vessel, weapons armed and ready. The commanding officer of the fleet, High Warlord Krelvok, demanded surrender. "You are trespassing in Dominion space. Power down immediately, or you will be destroyed." There was no response. The warship continued forward, ignoring the threats, undeterred by the overwhelming force surrounding it. Krelvok's patience ran out. He gave the order to fire. Hundreds of energy cannons unleashed their fury upon the vessel, filling the void with fire and destruction. The Dominion's most powerful weapons struck the warship directly, but nothing happened. The energy blasts disappeared upon impact, as if swallowed by the void itself. The warship's hull remained untouched, unscathed. Panic spread through the Dominion fleet as they realized their attacks had done nothing. And then the warship finally responded. Its weapons came to life, and in an instant, the void of space was filled with devastation. Beams of dark energy tore through Dominion ships as if they were made of paper. Shields collapsed, armor melted, and entire battlecruisers were reduced to dust in seconds. The Dominion forces tried to retreat, but the warship was faster, more precise, more merciless than anything they had ever faced. Krelvok watched in horror as his entire fleet was wiped out in a matter of minutes. He had fought humanity before, had seen their desperate resistance, had even admired their determination in battle. But this was something else. This was not human desperation. This was calculated, unstoppable vengeance. He sent out a final distress signal, his voice filled with fear. "We made a mistake. The war is not over. The humans, they left something behind, and it's coming for us." Then his transmission cut to static as his ship was engulfed in a blinding explosion. The warship continued forward, unhindered, unstoppable. The galaxy had believed that humanity was finished. They had believed the war was over. But now, as the warship carved its path of destruction, a chilling truth settled over the Dominion. The war had only just begun. The Dominion's high command was in chaos. Reports flooded in from the outer systems. An entire fleet had been wiped out, obliterated in minutes by a single human warship. No survivors, no wreckage left behind, just empty space where once the proud warships of the Dominion had stood. The HFY leadership could not believe it. The humans had lost the war. Their fleets were broken, their colonies abandoned, their forces shattered. There was no logical way a human warship, one of such terrifying power, could still exist. But the evidence was undeniable. It was real, and it was heading straight for their homeworld. The Dominion's Supreme War Council was called into an emergency session. The chamber, normally filled with the calm confidence of rulers who had won a war, was now filled with fear and uncertainty. High Chancellor Warship, the leader of the Dominion, listened in silence as his generals and admirals shouted over one another, debating how to stop the approaching threat. Some believed it was a final act of human defiance, a last suicide attack meant to strike fear into the Dominion. Others feared something far worse. What if this was not just one warship? What if there were more? What if humanity had hidden an entire fleet waiting for this moment? We must destroy it at all costs. Admiral Jector growled, slamming his clawed fist against the table. We will amass our strongest fleets, every warship we have. We will not let a single human vessel undo our victory. And if our weapons do not work? Another general asked, voice shaking. The last fleet sent to intercept it did not even scratch its hull. We do not know what we are dealing with. The room fell silent. That was the terrifying reality. The Dominion had fought humanity before, had suffered their tenacity, their refusal to surrender, but they had always been able to break them with superior numbers. Now that advantage meant nothing. They had no idea how to stop this thing. Then, for the first time in the meeting, High Chancellor Warship spoke. His voice was calm, yet there was a hint of something none had ever heard from him before. Fear. Send a message, he ordered, his golden eyes staring at the holographic display of the approaching warship. A message. Admiral Jector frowned. To whom? To the humans. Warship said slowly. We need to know what this is. If there is any way to stop it, we must ask them. The room erupted into protests. The very idea of begging humanity for help was unthinkable. They had defeated them. The humans should have been the ones pleading, not the other way around. But as the warship continued its unstoppable approach, as every attempt to halt its advance ended in complete annihilation, the realization sank in. Pride would not save them. The message was sent, broadcasted across all human frequencies. To any remaining human forces, we seek communication. We do not wish for more war. We demand an explanation for the vessel that is approaching our core systems. If this is your doing, we will negotiate terms. We must speak. Hours passed. No response. The warship did not slow down. Then, just as the Dominion began to lose hope, their transmission was answered. The screen flickered, and a shadowed figure appeared. A human, standing in a dimly lit room, their face obscured. Their voice was cold, emotionless. You wanted the war to end, the human said, but you do not get to decide how it ends. The signal cut out. The warship continued its advance, and the Dominion realized, far too late, that they had awakened something beyond their control. Panic spread through the Dominion like wildfire. Every system, every military outpost, every fleet was placed on high alert. The war was supposed to be over, yet now an unstoppable human warship was carving its way through their territory, leaving only silence in its wake. Entire defense stations fell without a single distress signal. Patrol fleets vanished before they could even report visual contact. The ship moved like a ghost, untouchable, unstoppable. It did not respond to hails, did not engage in communication, did not deviate from its course. It was heading straight for Varkas Prime, the heart of the Dominion, the seat of its power, and nothing could stop it. The Dominion's greatest fleets gathered, forming an unbreakable line around the capital. Thousands of warships, planetary defense platforms, and orbital cannons aimed at the void where the warship would emerge. The battle would take place here, at the very gates of the Dominion's might. The commanders steeled themselves, their claws gripping the controls, their voices barking orders to the countless soldiers under their command. It is one ship, Admiral Jector reminded his forces through the command channel. We have defeated their entire race. We have wiped out their colonies. We will not be defeated by a relic of a dead enemy. His words carried strength, but his eyes betrayed doubt. They had seen the footage of the destruction it had left behind. It was not a relic. It was something else, something far beyond what they had prepared for. Then, the warship arrived. It did not come from the expected route. It did not emerge where their fleets had been waiting. No, it appeared behind them, as if it had known exactly where they would set their trap. The Dominion forces scrambled to reposition, but it was too late. The warship's weapons activated, and the void itself seemed to scream. Beams of energy, black as the abyss, sliced through the Dominion's forces like a blade through paper. Warships melted, their hulls collapsing in on themselves as if consumed by something far worse than fire. Shielding technology failed instantly, as though it had never existed at all. The Dominion's finest warships, vessels that had conquered human space, now burned like dying stars. The orbital cannons fired in desperation, unleashing enough energy to crack a moon, but the warship didn't even flinch. It absorbed the attacks, its hull drinking in the power like a bottomless void. Then it retaliated. The defense platforms exploded in unison, their destruction synchronized as if orchestrated by an unseen force. The ground shook beneath Varkas Prime as debris rained down, setting entire cities ablaze. The citizens of the Dominion, who had celebrated their victory over humanity, now cowered in terror. The unbreakable Dominion, the masters of war, were powerless. Admiral Jector, once so sure of his strength, now stood frozen on the bridge of his flagship. He had spent his life fighting, conquering, believing in the Dominion's supremacy. But now, as he watched his entire fleet collapse in minutes, he understood the truth. The war had never ended. The humans had simply waited for this moment. The warship sent out one final transmission, its voice echoing across the Dominion's shattered channels. A single sentence, cold and merciless. You wanted total victory. Now you will understand its price. And then, the warship turned its weapons toward the surface of Varkas Prime. The Dominion's homeworld was about to burn. The skies of Varkas Prime darkened as the warship loomed above, a silent executioner passing judgment. The Dominion had spent years fighting humanity, believing them broken, crushed, finished. Yet now, as the last remnants of their proud fleets disintegrated into debris, they realized how deeply they had miscalculated. The warship had not come for battle. It had come for punishment. The ground forces of Varkas Prime scrambled into position. Anti-orbital cannons locked onto the massive vessel, missile silos opened, and planetary defense shields activated, encasing the capital city in an energy dome that had withstood countless invasions. The Dominion had conquered a dozen worlds with these defenses. Surely they would not fail now. High Chancellor Vornkesh stood in the war room, surrounded by his top generals. His clawed hands gripped the edges of the command table, his golden eyes scanning the holoscreens with growing dread. The defenses were prepared, their weapons primed, their forces ready. Yet something was wrong. The warship did not attack immediately. It simply hovered in the upper atmosphere, motionless, as if considering its next move. The silence was unbearable. Then the first strike came. It was unlike anything the Dominion had ever seen. There was no blinding explosion, no firestorm of plasma bombardments. Instead, the warship unleashed a wave of energy that rippled across the sky like a dark tide. The planetary shields flickered, twisted, then shattered, not overloaded, not bypassed, but simply erased from existence. The Dominion generals gasped in horror. Those shields had withstood entire armadas, yet this one vessel had erased them, as if they had never been there at all. Fire everything. One of the commanders roared, his voice laced with desperation. The planetary cannons erupted, sending streams of plasma and kinetic slugs the size of buildings toward the warship. Missile after missile streaked through the sky, detonating against its hull. But the warship remained unharmed. It did not dodge. It did not retaliate. It simply let the Dominion fire everything they had, and when the barrage finally ended, when the planet's greatest weapons had exhausted themselves, the warship responded with a single, terrifying act. The sky itself split open. A beam of pure darkness descended from the warship, striking the center of the capital city. There was no explosion, no fire, just silence. Then the buildings, the people, the very ground itself began to unravel, pulled upward into the beam like dust caught in a vacuum. The capital, the very heart of the Dominion, was vanishing. Screams echoed across every transmission. The greatest city in the Dominion, home to billions, was being erased from existence. High Chancellor Vornkesh could only watch in horror. His mind refused to comprehend what he was seeing. The warship was not simply destroying his world, it was removing it, piece by piece, as if reality itself was being rewritten. The transmission channels filled with desperate pleas from soldiers, citizens, and commanders alike. "We surrender. We surrender. Please, stop. We will do anything." The warship gave no answer. The beam widened. More of the planet was consumed, whole districts pulled apart, ships vanishing as they tried to escape. Then, for the first time since its arrival, the warship sent a message. One broadcasted not just to Varkus Prime, but across the entire Dominion. "You ended the war," the voice said, cold and emotionless. "But you did not win it." The warship had come not for victory, but for justice. The Dominion had thought they had broken humanity. But in truth, humanity had never been broken. They had been waiting, watching, preparing, and now they had returned to make the Dominion understand what it meant to lose. The High Chancellor fell to his knees as the warship continued its judgment, and for the first time in Dominion history, he knew the taste of true fear. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy through fear and force for centuries. They had crushed entire civilizations, erased species that refused to kneel, and rewritten history to glorify their own strength. But now, as the sky of Varkus Prime split apart and their capital city dissolved into nothingness, they felt something they had never truly understood before: hopelessness. The warship hovered above like a silent god, watching as the Dominion's homeworld trembled beneath its gaze. Every defense had failed. Every weapon had been useless. The planet's strongest shields had been erased, its greatest city consumed in an instant. The Chancellor's war room was filled with chaos. Generals shouted orders, but there was nowhere left to command. Soldiers ran through the burning corridors, trying to reach evacuation ships, but the spaceports had been reduced to craters. Civilians flooded the streets in blind panic, pushing, trampling, desperate to flee. But there was nowhere to run. The Dominion, which had once spread terror across the stars, now found itself drowning in it. The High Chancellor stood frozen, his claws gripping the edges of the command table as if he could force reality to change through sheer will. His golden eyes stared at the hull screens, at the endless reports of destruction, of failure, of death. He could barely process it. This was impossible. Humanity was supposed to be extinct. They were supposed to be nothing more than a memory, a race that had fought valiantly, but had ultimately perished beneath the Dominion's might. And yet, here they were, not broken, not defeated, but standing over them, untouchable, unstoppable. "We must negotiate," one of the ministers stammered, his voice shaking. "We must beg for mercy." The Chancellor turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. Mercy. The word felt foreign in his mouth. The Dominion did not beg. They took. They conquered. They dictated the terms of existence for the lesser species. But now, as the warship loomed over them like an executioner, he realized something terrible. They were the lesser species now. He swallowed, forcing himself to move, to act. "Send a message to the warship," he ordered. "Offer them our full surrender. Offer them anything." The communications officer scrambled to comply, his claws trembling as he activated the transmission. Across the entire Dominion, the message echoed. To the vessel above Varkus Prime, this is High Chancellor Vorn Kesh of the Dominion. We acknowledge your power. We recognize your victory. We surrender unconditionally. We are prepared to meet any demands you set forth. Please, in the name of all who remain, we beg you to stop. Silence followed. The warship did not respond. It simply remained there, unmoving, its dark hull reflecting the burning planet below. Minutes passed. The Chancellor felt his heartbeat pounding in his chest, each second stretching endlessly. Then, finally, the warship moved. Slowly, it adjusted its position, its weapons shifting. Hope flickered in the Chancellor's mind. Perhaps they would listen. Perhaps this nightmare would end. Then the voice came. Cold. Mechanical. Final. No. The Chancellor's breath caught in his throat. His mind barely had time to register the meaning of the word before the warship acted. Another beam descended, not to a single city this time, but across the entire planet. The ground cracked, mountains crumbled, entire continents began to shift as the very core of Varkus Prime was torn apart. The Dominion's homeworld, the heart of their empire, was dying. Panic erupted across the Dominion's remaining systems as the footage spread. Billions watched in horror as their capital, their seat of power, was reduced to dust. And then, the warship spoke again, broadcasting to every surviving Dominion world. You believed the war had ended, but it had only begun. The transmission cut. The message was clear. This was not just vengeance. This was extermination. The warship was not here to conquer. It was here to erase the Dominion from existence, the same way the Dominion had tried to erase humanity. The High Chancellor fell back into his chair, his body shaking, his mind reeling. He had spent his life building the Dominion into an unstoppable force, but now he understood the truth. They were never unstoppable. They had simply never fought something stronger than themselves. Until now. The war was not over. It was only the beginning of humanity's revenge. The ruins of Varkus Prime smoldered in the darkness of space, its shattered remains drifting like silent tombstones of the once mighty Dominion. Across the galaxy, fear spread like wildfire. The footage of the planet's destruction had been broadcast to every Dominion-controlled system, every outpost, every world that had once sworn loyalty to their empire. And with it came the chilling message: the war was not over. The survivors of the Dominion, from high-ranking officials to lowly soldiers, scrambled for answers. What could they do? Where could they run? The warship had not responded to their surrender. It had not asked for terms. It had simply destroyed, without hesitation, without mercy. The Dominion had spent centuries being the terror of the galaxy, but now they were the ones who trembled. On the bridge of the last remaining Dominion command ship, Grand Marshal Tekvar stared at the battle reports flashing across his holoscreen. Every attempt to retaliate had failed. The Dominion's most powerful fleets had been obliterated before they could even fire a single shot. Their strongest defenses had been bypassed, as if they were nothing more than paper. The warship moved like a ghost, appearing without warning, striking with terrifying precision, and vanishing before any reinforcements could arrive. "What do we do?" one of his officers asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Tekvar exhaled slowly, his claws tightening around the edges of the control panel. He had fought countless battles. He had crushed rebellions, led planetary invasions, commanded entire fleets. And yet, against this enemy, against the wrath of humanity, he had no answer. "We run," he finally said, the words burning in his throat. "We scatter. Every Dominion world must go into hiding. If we are to survive, we must disappear." The officer looked at him in disbelief. "You mean, abandon the Empire?" Tekvar closed his eyes for a brief moment before forcing himself to speak. "There is no Empire anymore." As if to punctuate his words, an alert flashed on the screen. Another Dominion world had fallen. Another fleet had been lost. The warship was moving faster, its destruction growing more relentless. There was no pattern, no logic, only pure, calculated vengeance. The officer swallowed hard. And if we run, what then? Tekvar turned, his gaze like steel. Then we pray that they do not follow. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Humanity was not going to stop. The war was over, but the reckoning had just begun. The galaxy held its breath as humanity's warship continued its relentless campaign of destruction. One by one, the once proud worlds of the Dominion fell, their cities crumbling to dust, their fleets reduced to smoldering wreckage. Every attempt to stop the warship was futile. Every desperate plea for mercy was ignored. The galaxy had watched as the Dominion, the self-proclaimed rulers of the stars, were swept away by the unyielding fury of humanity. And as the final strongholds of the Dominion collapsed, the true terror of humanity became apparent. This was not just a war, it was a reckoning. The warship did not seek power. It did not seek revenge in the way the Dominion had. It was not interested in ruling or taking territory. No, it was simply cleaning up the galaxy, a final correction of the scales, a brutal reminder of what happens when a species is pushed too far. In the hushed chambers of the last remaining Dominion stronghold, High Chancellor Vornkesh stood before a holo map of the galaxy, his eyes hollow with dread. The once mighty Dominion was no more. Its fleets lay scattered in the void, its worlds reduced to ashes. The message had been clear, and now, the High Chancellor was faced with the harshest reality of all. There was nothing left to fight for. What remains of the Dominion? One of his last surviving generals asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Chancellor did not answer immediately. He knew the answer already. There was no more Dominion. It had been wiped from existence. We surrender, the High Chancellor said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and shame. The general's eyes widened in disbelief. You want to surrender to them? Vornkesh turned slowly, his golden eyes now dull with defeat. There is nothing left. We are broken. The warship has spoken. It has passed judgment on us. The general's face twisted with anger and fear. You can't just give up. We are the Dominion. We. No. The Chancellor interrupted, his voice barely audible. We were the Dominion. And now we are nothing. It was true. The Dominion had once been the pinnacle of power, a race that had crushed and conquered without mercy. But humanity had come for them. And now, they were nothing more than a fading memory. With a final, heavy heart, Vornkesh activated the communication system, sending out a single transmission to the warship, the same vessel that had destroyed everything he had built. The message was simple, and yet it carried the weight of centuries of arrogance, violence, and destruction. We surrender, the Chancellor said, his voice cracking. We accept the judgment of humanity. Silence followed. For what felt like an eternity, the warship did not respond. And then, finally, the voice came, cold, emotionless, and final. The war is over, it said. But remember this, High Chancellor. We did not seek this war. You brought it to us. You chose destruction. We simply showed you the cost of your actions. The transmission ended. The warship was gone. The galaxy was silent. The final remnants of the Dominion drifted away into oblivion. The stars once again calm. Humanity had not just won the war. They had erased the threat of the Dominion forever. And as the last survivors of the Dominion disappeared into the darkness, they understood the terrible truth. Humanity had never been the conquerors in this story. They had been the avengers. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. And now, they knew the true price of that mistake. The war had ended, and humanity had won, without a single shot fired in return.